This is Anthony Davis with Shapeshift Wellness, and in today's video, we are going to be talking about Chaturanga. That's a yoga push-up. We're going to be talking about how yoga teachers usually start off people way too hard. They don't offer the proper regressions, and they don't really know when a person can or shouldn't be doing that exercise and needs to do something easier, and when a person is strong enough to go ahead and do something harder. We're going to be talking about the principle of progressive overload. If you've never heard that, the principle of progressive overload, then somebody in your yoga teacher training failed you miserably, because if you do anything with any kind of exercise, you need to know about that principle. Let's check it out. Real quick, make sure that you like this video, do subscribe to my channel, and hit that bell so that you get notifications when I release future videos. And share this video with your friends, especially if they love anatomy and yoga. I think that our community is poorly educated in general on biomechanics and scientific principles of yoga. So the more people we have educated on this stuff, the better community we have as a whole. And hey, make sure that you stick around to the end of the video, because I'm going to tell you how do you know when a person can do something harder and progress the exercise, or when they need to do something easier and regress the exercise. Let's check it out. This is a standard progression that I use to move people through and to Chaturanga. And this is important because Chaturanga is introduced in yoga classes as a beginner's pose. It is introduced in almost every single yoga class that you go to, and it's usually not given much of an explanation. And certainly, it's not really given the time that it deserves to break it down, allow people to really have and understand their options for this pose. And then essentially what happens is, at the very most, teachers will take a moment to say, oh yeah, and if this is too hard, then do it on your knees. Yeah, that's true, but think about what you just did. If you're in a class with a bunch of people and you say, okay, then we're going to do Chaturanga, and we're going to do, you bend the arms and you get the elbows in line with the ribs, or I don't know, however you cue it, and then you just throw in a casual, oh, but if it's too hard, lower your knees. Think about that psychologically. You've just made it really, really difficult for a person who needs to regress, A, to know whether or not they really need to regress, because maybe it doesn't cause them pain yet, and B, you've made it like a peer pressure thing. Well, if everybody else is doing this full chatter, nobody else is lowering their knees, I'm not going to be the only one to lower my knees. So if you start by forcing people into the hard thing first, then psychologically, there's like this peer pressure thing where everybody else feels like they have to perform. Okay. And that's stupid. So, the principle of progressive overload essentially teaches us that in order to accomplish something difficult, for example, this full Chaturanga dandasana, which is a very demanding pose for your shoulders and elbows and chest and et cetera, and core stability. And okay. In order to do that, you need to spend lots and lots and lots of time doing something way easier, and then moving to something slightly harder, and then moving to something a little bit harder, and then eventually making your way to the thing that you want to be able to do. And it takes time and patience and dedication and consistency. Now let's look at the progression that I have laid out. The first thing is we start with the knees down, and we don't even do a full depth Chaturanga. So I guess our full depth Chaturanga would have our shoulders in line with the elbows, and then that would be your angle here. Well, even that is too much for a lot of people. Stick around to the end, because I'm going to show you how to know if it's actually going to be too difficult for you. And a lot of people are like, well, it's easy, it doesn't hurt, I feel kind of strong, so it's fine, right? I would not agree with that sentiment. So I'm going to start everybody in my classes, everybody, with the knees down, because it's just easy. And even if at the end of class we want to end up here in this full Chaturanga for people, if you start them with the knees down and you only do half a Chaturanga, you barely bend the elbows, then what's going to happen is, after you do a handful of those, you're essentially getting more motor unit recruitment. So your muscle fibers, you don't always use 100% of your muscle. In fact, you rarely use even close to 100% of all the muscle in a given movement. So if you essentially wake it up by doing easier movements, then you're able to use more of that full muscle. So then if rather than jumping right into Chaturanga like you would do in Ashtanga yoga, inhale, reach up, exhale, fall forward, inhale, lift halfway, exhale, Chaturanga, right? Whoa, wow, that happened fast. No time to warm up for that, eh? So if we start here and we say, look, we're going to have the knees down and we're going to have the elbows bent about halfway. We're not going full depth right away. We're just going halfway. And we do a few of those, knock a few of those out, build some motor unit recruitment, get the blood flowing, get your brain on board. All right, we're exercising. And then we can progress it as long as people aren't compensating in a silly way. Then we do knees down and we actually lower the elbows so that the elbows are, or we lower the shoulders so that the elbows are at 90 degrees, but the knees are still down. This is important. This makes a shorter lever. So levers, essentially the reason, well, oh man, this will be a whole video to explain the levers in Chaturanga. But essentially what's happening is when the knees are down, then this lever, think about this like a wheelbarrow. If this is a wheelbarrow, and then here's the, like where you would put your gravel or your dirt or whatever in the wheelbarrow, and you're trying to pick up the end of the wheelbarrow, then it's shorter. And so the weight here in your center of mass can exert less downward force versus a lever that's here and it's a really long lever. Then you've got your center of mass here, it's pressing down, and because it's a longer lever, it's able to exert more downward force, if that makes sense. It's the reason why if you took a weight in your hand, if here's a person and you hold a weight, so here's your arms, if you hold a weight close to your body, it's easy to hold, but if you extend that weight out here, and you try to hold that same like 10 pounds, it's going to be really hard to hold that. It's basically the same reason. That's one of the main reasons why knees down Chaturanga is really a lot easier. Okay, here we go. So then we progress to knees up, but when we lift the knees, now we made a longer lever. And so in order to make the exercise not terribly hard, we go knees up and then we barely bend the elbows. Okay, so I said half Chaturanga here. In reality, I would have like 6 steps. So I would start with like a knees down quarter Chaturanga, and then I would go to a knees down half Chaturanga, and then I would do a full Chaturanga, and then I would go here and I'd do like a knees up quarter Chaturanga, and then I go to a half Chaturanga, knees up half Chaturanga, and then I would progress to the actual, like our full Chaturanga. So if you take time, and this is going to, and then eventually, so we're here, we have our elbows bent just barely, and then, you kind of get this angle and you see, here's like week 1 through, 1 to 2 weeks of doing it here. And then, here's another 1 to 2 weeks. Right. And then, another weeks, and then blah, blah, blah. And so here we have a month of training, and this would be a fast progression. And then, a couple months later, months down the road, we have this, here we go. We've got basically a 90-degree angle ish at the elbow. We have our, boom, that's our Chaturanga. And that took time. It takes months to build up to that. And we don't give students enough time in yoga classes to do that. And the reason we don't is because we peer pressure everybody into starting with the full Chaturanga. There's nothing wrong with Chaturanga. People call it a shoulder shredder. Well, yeah, okay. But you don't understand how injury works. And yoga teachers, and I've been guilty of this in the past, of thinking that a pose is dangerous because of the position. Well, it places a lot of stress on the shoulders, and therefore it's going to shred your shoulders. No, it's going to shred your shoulders, quote unquote, because you aren't prepared for it yet. Not because the position is bad, but because you haven't taken the time to do months of knees down quarter Chaturangas, and then months of knees down full depth chaturangas. And then months of knees up, little baby chaturanga elbow bends, right? And then finally, maybe after a year of consistently, that's the other key, is consistently practicing yoga, now we do chaturanga, right? It takes time, patience, consistency, and load over time, okay? So I know I was extremely redundant there, but it is an incredibly important point. Injury doesn't happen because chaturanga is bad. Injury happens because you didn't give your students or yourself enough time and permission to back off and do something easier for a long time. Build up strength, build up resiliency, build up confidence, build up motor control and coordination in this progression. Okay, so that's the principle of progressive overload as we apply it to chaturanga. Now, how do you know if you need to regress or if you can go ahead and do something more difficult? Because some of you listening probably are super strong and you're like, well, I'm ready to be doing like handstands and planches and pikes and blah, 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 all the stuff. Let's check it out. This is the simplest way that I've found to generally tell if a person needs to regress. In other words, they need to do something easier, or if they are strong enough to go ahead and make their chaturanga a little bit more difficult, give themselves more of a challenge. This is common yoga wisdom. This is common yoga wisdom that's correct, but it's correct for the wrong reasons. In yoga, we talk about, oh no, if your shoulders are hiking up by your ears, or if your scapula or winging, your shoulders are going to explode. No, they're not going to explode. There's nothing biomechanically wrong with this position. Okay, it's not dangerous for your shoulders. However, it is an indication that your shoulder is in a dangerous position, not because the position itself is bad, but because if you have to do this in order to achieve your chaturanga variation, then you don't have the strength to be there in the first place. So it's not that the position is bad, but it's that the position is happening because you were too weak in the first place to accomplish the movement. So if you see somebody hiking their shoulders up, their scapular winging, their shoulders are going towards their ears, their lumbar spine is, hyperlordotic, their head is, pressing towards the ground. Step one is to ask yourself, are they too weak or are their muscles too stupid? And I mean that lovingly, but are their muscles just not coordinated? So ask them, hey, can you, keep your head there and keep your shoulders in the, where they are, keep them stable as you move. And if a little suggestion eliminates all of this stuff, it all goes away, and then they do this perfect, chaturanga, then they're strong. They're super strong. Their muscles just weren't being used to their capacity. Okay. However, if that's not the case, and if instead you try to correct it and you try to say, all right, try to keep your shoulders here, try to keep your belly in, try to keep your head back, and they simply can't do it and they start shaking or, what otherwise showing that they lack strength, then okay, they need to back off. They need to do an easier variation. So if you're able to progress through that whole chaturanga series where you do your knees down and your knees, and then you bend fully and then you lift your knees and you bend just a little and then you finally, and here you are, you're doing your full chaturangas and you're kicking ass and your shoulders are not hiking up and your lumbar spine is not hyperlordotic and your head's not going to the ground. Again, not that any of those things are bad for your body. It's just an indication that you lack motor control and strength and you need to regress for a little while, build up some strength, and then come back to it. If you're doing all those things solid, without compensations, now it's time that you can start to advance into, more difficult calisthenics that all the Instagram people are doing, where they're doing here's your, they're going here and they've got their arms here and they're balancing on their arms and shit. And they're doing pike push-ups and planching and all the things. Now it's time that you could start to progress into some of that really, wild, fun stuff. Okay. It's not dangerous, but you have to start here. So that wraps it up. Again, I've been incredibly redundant on this point, but it is an incredibly important point. If you are a yoga teacher, please start everybody in your classes with an easy variation. And then if you see people who are really just kicking ass and they're super strong and they're just super coordinated in those positions, go to them individually and specifically say, hey, do you want to try something harder? If so, do this. Or you can teach your students what I just taught you here is, hey, if you notice that your shoulders are flaring, your head is going, your lumbar spine is compensating, blah, 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 you're shaking, your elbows are flaring out. Not that those are a bad thing. It's just an indication that they don't have the strength and coordination yet. Then you can teach your students to be to develop their inner awareness and say, hey, if you notice that you compensate by shrugging your shoulders, then you need to back off. And that's a good thing. It just means that you are self-aware. And that's the practice of yoga, is developing self-awareness, being aware of, yeah, my body, can't quite handle this yet. And that's an exercise of reflection and honesty and humility. And that's yoga. Yoga is not doing, full chaturanga. Yoga is not, going and doing this because everybody else is doing it. Yoga is not putting your foot behind your head forcefully because everybody else is doing it, doing the splits because everybody else is doing it. Yoga is awareness. Yoga is consciousness. Yoga is being honest with yourself, knowing yourself. Svadhyaya, self-study. That's yoga. Okay? So if we're going to be doing exercise and we're going to call it yoga, we better be actually doing some yoga. So I will step off of my soapbox, my Chaturanga soapbox, and I will kindly pass this soapbox along to somebody else to place it under their hand so they can use it as an incline press to make their Chaturanga easier. I will see you in the next episode. Please comment. Hey, drop suggestions on if you want me to make a video on stuff, because I'm looking for ideas right now. I'm running out of shoulder related ideas. I'm going to have to go down a whole nother rabbit hole. So I appreciate the feedback. I appreciate the support. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, share with your friends. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.